Most people think they know what it means when someone says they don't believe in God. They picture a life without meaning, a moral compass spinning out of control, a world reduced to cold equations. That picture isn't just wrong, it's upside down. The reality is far more human than people expect. A life without belief in the supernatural isn't empty, it's often fuller, because it begins with honesty, with looking at the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. And yet, that simple choice, to live without believing in something we can't verify, is deeply misunderstood. People assume that disbelief is a statement about everything, that if you reject one claim, you've rejected all purpose, all beauty, all wonder. But ask yourself, does the night sky stop being breathtaking because you don't think a deity painted it? Does love feel less profound because you know it came from evolution and human connection instead of divine design? If anything, it becomes more precious because it's ours, fragile, brief, and real. But why do so many get it wrong? Part of it is history. For thousands of years, belief was the default. When something was unexplained, people reached for gods, spirits, magic, and the habit stuck. Even today, when science explains more than ever, the idea that morality or meaning needs a supernatural foundation still lingers. It's like an echo from a time when lightning was a sign of anger and disease was a curse. But here's the strange thing. The question isn't whether life can have meaning without God. It's whether life ever needed God to have meaning in the first place. Think about it. People create meaning in the smallest acts. A parent comforting a child, an artist painting a canvas, two strangers sharing a laugh on a train. None of that required divine instruction. It came from us, and from the connections that make us human. Yet many still believe that without a higher power, morality collapses. They imagine that rules and ethics come down from above, and without them, chaos follows. But morality isn't a list carved in stone. It's a living process, an agreement shaped by empathy, by reason, by the shared experience of suffering and joy. That's why different cultures have always evolved different norms, even when they claim the same gods. If morality were handed down perfectly, why would so many holy texts contradict each other? Why would ancient laws condone things we now find horrific, like slavery or stoning? The truth is, morality moves forward not because of religion, but often in spite of it. And here's another misconception. People think a life without religious belief must feel hopeless, as if hope can only grow in the soil of faith. But what is hope, really? It's not the guarantee that someone out there has a plan for you. It's the belief that tomorrow can be better than today, and that you can do something to make it so. That's not just hope, that's responsibility, because when there's no invisible hand to fix the world, it's up to us. There's a certain kind of freedom in that. It's not the reckless freedom people imagine, like do whatever you want. It's the freedom of owning your choices, knowing there's no cosmic judge to excuse or condemn them. That might sound terrifying to some, but it's also liberating, because it means the meaning you build is yours, not borrowed. One of the biggest myths people believe is that those without religion live in a kind of moral vacuum, as if the only thing keeping a person from harming others is fear of punishment after death. If that were true, what would that say about the nature of humanity? That kindness and compassion are fake, propped up by fear? The reality is simpler. Morality grows out of empathy. We know what it's like to hurt, so we understand why causing harm matters. Studies in psychology show that even infants have a basic sense of fairness and care, long before anyone can teach them a creed or commandment. Of course, there's another layer to this misunderstanding. People think life without a God must feel meaningless because they've been told over and over that purpose must come from something eternal, something beyond this world. But when you look closely, that argument collapses. If your meaning depends on eternity, is it truly your meaning? Or is it something handed to you like a pre-written script? If the only reason your life matters is because someone else decided it does, what does that say about autonomy? Isn't it more profound to create meaning knowing it won't last forever? Knowing that every choice matters precisely because time is limited. This is what many get wrong. They think disbelief is about emptiness when it's really about depth, about facing reality without crutches and still finding beauty in it. And yes, that's hard sometimes. There's no denying that life can be brutal, unfair, and short. It would be comforting to believe that all the pain will be undone, that justice will come after death, that we'll see everyone we love again. But comfort doesn't make something true. And the strength to live without illusions is a different kind of hope, one rooted in courage, not certainty. Think about the progress humanity has made, curing diseases, exploring space, building systems of justice and rights. None of that came from waiting for miracles. It came from human hands, human minds, human cooperation. The arc of progress bends not because someone wrote it in the stars, but because people decided to make the world less cruel than they found it. That's what happens when we stop expecting answers from above and start taking responsibility ourselves. And yet, here's a twist few talk about. For all the suspicion and stereotypes, people without religious belief often live by values that are deeply ethical. They volunteer, they donate, they build communities, sometimes more than those who claim a monopoly on virtue. Studies on secular societies show something fascinating. In countries where fewer people believe in God, crime rates are often lower, education and health outcomes better, life satisfaction higher. That's not because disbelief magically makes people good. It's because when systems are built on reason and empathy instead of dogma, people thrive. But despite the evidence, the old myths persist. The myth that without faith people are lost. The myth that suffering has no meaning unless someone planned it. The myth that love is less real if it's not eternal. These ideas aren't just wrong, they blind us to something far richer, the idea that life's meaning is ours to create, moment by moment. Not handed down from a throne, but built in kitchens and classrooms and quiet acts of kindness. So why do these misconceptions refuse to die? Why do so many cling to the idea that meaning, morality, and joy must come from a higher power? Part of the answer lies in psychology. Humans are storytellers by nature. We crave patterns, order, and purpose. When something tragic happens, a child gets sick, a disaster wipes out a town, the randomness feels unbearable, so people reach for an explanation, any explanation, even if it means imagining one. That impulse is deeply human, but it doesn't make the story true. Cognitive science backs this up. Our brains evolved to detect agency, to assume that when something moves, someone moved it. That kept our ancestors alive because hearing a rustle and assuming predator was safer than assuming wind. The problem is, that same wiring makes us see intention where there is none. In storms, in earthquakes, in the events of our lives. From there, it's a short leap to imagining a being pulling the strings. But the fact that something feels true doesn't make it so. That's a hard truth to accept, and many can't. They fear that without the grand story, life becomes meaningless. Yet here's the paradox. When you let go of the illusion, life doesn't shrink, it expands. Because now, meaning isn't dictated by some cosmic script. It's shaped by your choices, your values, your connections. It becomes something dynamic, not fixed, and that makes it far more real. Another reason these myths stick is social pressure. In many cultures, belief isn't just personal, it's communal. It's tied to family, identity, even survival. Questioning it can cost you relationships, respect, sometimes safety. People cling to faith because the alternative can feel like exile. And let's be honest, letting go is hard. It's not just about changing ideas. It's about unlearning habits, rewriting stories you've held since childhood. That takes courage, and most people would rather avoid that discomfort. Still, the fear of moral collapse looms largest. There's this persistent notion that without divine rules, everything becomes relative and chaos reigns. But history paints a different picture. Some of the most violent eras were soaked in religious certainty. Crusades, inquisitions, holy wars, all waged by people convinced they were acting on sacred orders. Meanwhile, some of the most peaceful societies today are among the least religious. If morality really depended on fear of hell, those patterns would be reversed. Instead, what we see is that morality thrives when it's rooted in empathy, education, and justice, not dogma. And here's something almost never discussed. When morality is tied to religion, it can actually hold back progress. Because if a rule is seen as divine, questioning it becomes taboo. That's why it took centuries to challenge laws that treated women as property or criminalized love between certain people. Those changes didn't come from scripture, they came from human reasoning, from the courage to say, this isn't fair, even when tradition said otherwise. So when people ask, how can life have meaning without God? The real question is, how can meaning be genuine if it's borrowed from someone else's design? Meaning that's handed to you isn't really yours. It's like reading a script you didn't write. But when you build it yourself, when you decide what matters based on reason, compassion, and experience, that meaning is alive. It belongs to you in a way nothing handed down ever could. So, what does life look like when it's grounded in reality instead of faith? A lot of people picture a gray, joyless existence as if wonder needs a creator to be real, but nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, when you strip away the idea that the universe was made for us, something astonishing happens. The world becomes bigger, stranger, and far more beautiful than any ancient story ever described. Think about this. You're on a planet spinning through space at incredible speed, orbiting a star that's just one among billions in a galaxy that's one among trillions. That perspective isn't bleak, it's breathtaking. It means the atoms in your body were forged in the hearts of stars long dead, that every breath you take is part of a chain of events stretching back nearly 14 billion years. You don't need a divine hand to make that profound. It already is. And when you look at life this way, gratitude takes on a different meaning. Not gratitude to an unseen giver, but gratitude for the sheer luck of being alive at all. The odds of you existing with your exact DNA in this exact moment are so astronomically small that it almost defies comprehension. That's why people who let go of belief often say life feels more precious, not less. Because when you know this is the only life you'll have, you start to value it differently. You start to pay attention. That doesn't mean life suddenly becomes easy. There's no cosmic safety net. Tragedies still happen, and there's no promise they'll be balanced out later. But that's what makes kindness matter more, not less. If this life is all we have, then easing someone's suffering isn't just a good deed, it's the only chance to make a difference. Justice becomes urgent because there's no afterlife where wrongs will be righted. Everything is here, now. And that makes every choice heavier, but also more meaningful. Another thing people often get wrong, they assume that without belief, joy disappears. But in reality, joy deepens, because it's not tied to pleasing a deity or earning eternal rewards. It comes from the simple, fleeting things, a shared laugh, a sunrise, the smell of rain. Those moments don't need to be infinite to matter. They matter because they're temporary. That's the paradox. Impermanence doesn't cheapen life, it gives it value. And what about love? Some think that if love doesn't last forever, it's hollow. But love isn't precious because it's eternal, it's precious because it's fragile. Because two conscious beings out of billions found each other in an uncaring universe. That's miraculous in the truest sense of the word, and it doesn't require magic, it requires being human. This perspective also sparks creativity and curiosity. When you stop assuming the answers are already written, every question becomes an adventure. Science isn't a cold replacement for faith, it's a fire that lights the unknown. It's what took us from thinking the earth was flat to mapping the cosmos, from blaming disease on demons to curing it with medicine. Every discovery reminds us that reality is far stranger and more fascinating than myth, and that pursuit never ends, because there's always more to learn. Now, some people hear all this and still say, but without belief, isn't life unbearably harsh? It's a fair question, because yes, facing reality without a safety net takes courage. There's no one pulling the strings, no ultimate plan that guarantees justice or reunion with lost loved ones. That can feel heavy, but here's the surprising thing. That weight doesn't crush you. It strengthens you. Psychologists call it existential resilience, the ability to live meaningfully in a universe without ultimate guarantees. Studies show that people who accept uncertainty often experience less anxiety than those clinging to rigid beliefs. Why? Because when your hope depends on something unprovable, you live in constant fear of doubt. Any crack in the story feels like catastrophe. But when you build your life on what you know, you remove that fragility. You stop asking for certainty and start embracing possibility. This shift doesn't lead to despair, it leads to empowerment. Because when there's no cosmic plan, you realize something profound. You are the plan. Your choices matter not because they were preordained, but because they weren't. That means every small act carries real weight. Every kindness, every moment of courage, every idea you share, it changes the story in a way no prophecy ever could. This mindset also transforms how we deal with loss. When someone dies, it's natural to long for reunion. The idea that they live on in another world is comforting, but comfort isn't the same as truth. And strangely, when you let go of that illusion, the grief becomes sharper, but also more honest. You cherish the time you had because you know it was finite. You celebrate their life instead of imagining it paused in some eternal waiting room. That honesty hurts, yes, but it also makes love fiercer while we're here. It pushes us to say the things that matter now, not someday. And here's the beauty of this perspective. It doesn't close doors, it opens them. When you accept that the universe owes you nothing, gratitude stops being conditional. You stop thinking in terms of deserving and start seeing life as a gift you didn't ask for but received anyway. That realization doesn't lead to nihilism, it leads to awe. Because out of endless chaos, here you are, alive and aware. That's not bleak, that's astonishing. One more thing people rarely talk about: rejecting illusions doesn't mean rejecting wonder. In fact, it makes wonder deeper. When you look at a nebula through a telescope, knowing it wasn't painted there for your benefit, it doesn't feel empty, it feels bigger. Because you're part of something vast and indifferent, and yet somehow you get to witness it. No myth can compete with that kind of reality. So why does all of this matter now? Because the way we see the world shapes the world we create. When we cling to illusions, we tend to accept suffering as part of a plan, or injustice as something that will be balanced later. That mindset breeds complacency. But when you know this life is all there is, urgency takes over. You stop waiting for paradise and start building a better reality here and now. Look at history. The greatest leaps forward in science, human rights, medicine, technology didn't come from prayer alone. They came from people who refused to accept that's just the way it is. They came from minds willing to question old certainties and explore new possibilities. That's what happens when responsibility shifts from the heavens to our own hands. It's not about arrogance, it's about accountability. When no one else is coming to save us, we become the ones who save each other. And this isn't just theory, we see it play out in data. Nations with higher levels of secular thinking often lead in innovation, healthcare, and social equality. Why? Because progress thrives on critical thinking and compassion, not dogma. When ethics aren't frozen in ancient texts, they can evolve. When ideas aren't shielded by sacred status, they can be tested, improved, discarded if harmful. That's how humanity moves forward. Of course, none of this means life without illusions is easy. There will always be unknowns, tragedies we can't justify, questions we can't answer. But here's the truth. Uncertainty isn't a flaw, it's freedom. It means the future isn't written, and that gives us the power to write it ourselves. So maybe the real secret life people get wrong is this: it's not a life of emptiness. It's a life of ownership, of wonder without walls, purpose without permission, morality without fear. It's a life where meaning isn't handed down from a throne, it's crafted in kitchens, classrooms, and quiet acts of care. That's not bleak, that's extraordinary. And if there's one takeaway, it's this: the absence of a script doesn't mean the story ends. It means the pen is in your hands. And that might be the most hopeful truth of all.